Today's review is going to be a little different than what we normally do. Normally, it's just me talking. However, when it comes to games such as Last Epoch, Diablo, PoE, I felt it necessary to bring an expert in who truly understands everything about this genre and who also knows way more about Last Epoch. So for my folks out there, please give a warm welcome to gamer and also one of my lead editors, JustJarrod. So Jarrod, you approached me the other day about Last Epoch and I didn't have really anything on this game other than I knew that it was going to be similar to Diablo. But the thing that caught my attention the most, especially coming from you, was that this, as you said, is the Diablo Killer.
Yeah, it definitely is, in my opinion. And we'll talk about, throughout the length of this video is why I do believe, it is the Diablo Killer. And there's many, many reasons. And like that coming from me, that's something big because I am a huge Diablo fan. I've been a big Diablo fan since Diablo 2, way back when I was like in middle school playing that game. Like RuneScape was big for you, right? Back in the day, that was my RuneScape was Diablo 2.
You got me in Diablo. I mean, remember, because I was actually like, I don't know if I'm going to play Diablo 4. And then you started hitting me up about it. And next thing you know it, I am, obsessing with it. Was playing with my necromancer, all into the story, the lore. And so this coming from you, it's not like this is someone that's hating on the Diablo series. And no, this is coming from someone who loves Diablos, played it for years, knows everything about it. And so for you to endorse Last Epoch in this way, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I played Last Epoch last year because it's been in early access for like 4 years. I played it last year. And I put like around 100 hours into it. And I ended up setting it down and kind of just hoping that, in the back of my mind, hoping that Blizzard would be able to knock D4 out of the park and knock Last Epoch out of the park because of how, not necessarily how much I trust Blizzard, but how much I love the series of Diablo and just wanted it to actually be good.
Right.
And, now that, Last Epoch is out, and Diablo 4 has been out, it is quite literally a Diablo killer in the way that Last Epoch was built around community focus. The devs wanted to make a game that the community would build with them, and for 5 years they've done that, whereas Diablo 4 wasn't like that. So Diablo 4 is just going to be endlessly playing catch-up with like what the community wants, versus Last Epoch has been already doing that for 5 years. So now that the game is out, it feels like a action RPG that has features that a community of action RPG fans would want, versus what Diablo 4 is, which is just them playing catch up right now.
Sure. And I actually want to circle back around for those that aren't familiar. At its core, Last Epoch is that Diablo-style game, that top-down action RPG where you're finding loot, you're finding gear, you're leveling up, you're getting new skills, you're making those builds, then hitting Endgame and rinse and repeat. That sounds like Diablo. So what is that main draw that you believe separates the two?
Yeah, it definitely is. Does sound like a Diablo. I mean, they do call these games Diablo clones at the end of the day, because Diablo and Blizzard were kind of around the time when they made Diablo 1. Games like this didn't really exist. There were definitely earlier variations of things like this where you dungeon crawl and gather loot and equip things. But they have been doing this for a while and were the kings of it at one time. And now it's gotten to the point where they just kind of sit back and don't innovate. And I think that's the biggest difference here between Diablo and Last Epoch, is that Last Epoch and the devs behind the game are really innovating on the genre, which is something that Diablo hasn't done in, I'd say, since Diablo 2. I personally didn't like Diablo 3 that much, so I was hoping D4 was going to be the time where they finally innovate and bring new things to the table for the genre. Like Path of Exile. Path of Exile is, another action RPG. I'd argue right now you have the 3 big action RPGs, and it's going to be Last Epoch, it's going to be Diablo 4, it's going to be Path of Exile. There are like other smaller ones out there that you've probably never heard about, that aren't like in the mainstream talk. But Last Epoch and Path of Exile are innovating on the genre, while Diablo is just kind of doing the typical mechanics and systems that you'd expect without bringing anything new to the table. And I think that's really the biggest thing that separates Last Epoch from Diablo right now.
Sure. And I love what you also told me too the other day. You said that Last Epoch fits itself snugly in between D4 and PoE in terms of depth. And I like that because I felt like for me, Diablo, it was really my first experience with that type of game. But at some point, it just, the depth, you started to realize in certain areas, especially at builds, where things started to feel a little more shallow than what you expected, at least early on. But you're saying that Last Epoch does fit in between those two. So not as hardcore as PoE, which I've heard is insane.
Definitely fits in between PoE and D4. PoE, in my opinion, like Path of Exile doesn't really compete with Diablo. It's on an unbelievably different scale in terms of like challenge and difficulty. Like D4 is like the lowest, like most casual version of an action RPG, and then Path of Exile is like at the top of that. And yeah, Last Epoch is trying to fit somewhere in between that. So there's more depth than Diablo 4, but you don't have to, study the game like you do in Path of Exile to be able to succeed at it. And I think if Path of Exile 2 is made like easier for beginners than the first game is, then I can see Path of Exile 2 and Last Epoch kind of sitting along the same like middle ground, and then being possibly a Diablo Killer as well. But right now I don't think like Path of Exile is like got a huge hurdle for like time commitment, and you need to like really sink tons of hours into it to be able to like have fun with that game, which is the complete opposite of Diablo. Like I give the example all the time to my friends when explaining Diablo is that my dad can play Diablo 4 and he has to look down at the controller to hit the buttons before he hits them because he doesn't know, what X is on the PlayStation and things like that. Because the game is easy.
Right.
My dad can play it. Whereas like Path of Exile, like there ain't no way ever he's touching that game.
Sure. Well, I say one of the good things that Last Epoch has going for it is the price point is really good, being half the price of D4. As far as, we're going to get into story and gameplay and all that other stuff, but as far as like in-game purchases, I don't see anything outrageous in terms of cosmetic items.
Yeah, and it also kind of fits in the middle ground there as well, because it is like $35 to buy the game, whereas Diablo is full price, $70 game. Diablo has a $10 battle pass every single season. Diablo has $30 to $65 cosmetics that you can buy, which is nuts. I mean, that
is wild, man. That's wild, even coming from a Destiny player. Yeah. You know what I mean? With our $20 ornaments.
Yep, and it kind of tells me now that like, early on Diablo, the devs said that, you wouldn't have to spend money on microtransactions to get armor that looks cool. That was clearly not the truth. And now that,
Sure.
There's been months where like all the armor that looks really good is $40 or something like that, and you don't really get it in game. And they've kind of shown their hand when it comes to these microtransactions, that it kind of makes you think, like, I wonder if like the character creator, like you being able to like really customize your character and their face and their tattoos really was there just to sell you more cosmetics, because you can buy like tattoos for your character and things like that. Whereas most action RPGs, like you don't get to customize your character. That's never been a thing in action RPGs, because you don't ever see your character's face. You're so far away from your character. Like a character creator almost makes no sense.
Right.
But yeah, so as far as microtransaction goes, like Last Epoch, $35, you can buy different visual looks and pets and things like that. They range from like $5 to $20. And then like Path of Exile, obviously, that's a free game, and they have microtransactions as well. So Last Epoch sits between Diablo and Path of Exile in the price points as well.
In the monetization. Wow.
And
okay.
What's really nice is in-game, in Last Epoch, there's a lot of loot and like rare loot and unique items that have like cool visual looks to them. So you do have that visual progression without spending money. Whereas in Diablo, you don't feel that visual progression without, opening up your wallet.
Sure. I will say, man, Last Epoch, just from my experience with it for the past few days, I just love the look of your character. I don't know what it is about the areas themselves. I guess because I have been playing Diablo last year and I was used to just that grungy style. Last Epoch just really pops. I think the world feels really vibrant and just the overall look of everything looks really, really good. Like it looks better than Diablo does.
Yeah, no, they knocked it out of the park visually. It's more of like a high fantasy versus Diablo's like dark gore style, which in Diablo 3 they kind of went with more lighthearted, more friendly approach, and I personally didn't like that. I wanted that like darkness, that gore back, the like evil tones. But I think what happens when you do something like that is it's hard to it's more grounded. When you're that dark and evil and sinister, there's less you can do in terms of art style, because everything needs to be that tone or else it starts to feel out of place. Whereas Last Epoch, like, they're not about like this is like an evil world where everybody sucks and you want to just go around killing everybody because everybody's bad in the game and an asshole or something like that, like in Diablo's story. That isn't really the case. So they have like this high fantasy tone. They've got time travel. They've got like, which is another completely unique thing. I don't think any action RPG has ever done time travel. And they really did knock it out of the park. Visuals, the animations, the skills. Once you like start messing around with all the skills and things, they feel powerful. They feel impactful. The art design is really good. Lighting, shadows, and like I don't have a crazy good PC, and I run the game on Ultra with no issues.
It's funny that you mentioned the time travel thing, because I noticed that too, the different eras of the game, and that changes the different enemies that you're going up against, but it still keeps that fantasy tone, which I guess for me, when you're playing it for many hours on end, you appreciate that tone more than the dark, grungy tone that I experienced with Diablo. But story-wise, what can you tell me about Last Epoch there?
Yeah, so story isn't, a huge focus. Most action RPGs don't really have crazy good stories. Now, I'd argue Diablo's lore is great. I didn't know anything about Diablo's story until the fourth game came out because it was so hard to follow in the other games. Now I feel like I'm a master of the Diablo lore and the story. And I think D4 did a really good job with story, but mainly because of the cinematics. Like the cinematics in D4 are like movie-like. Like it looks like you're watching a movie. Last Epoch story, it's about time travel. It's pretty much your run-of-the-mill like story where like the void is like taking over and like you have to like fight it back, and there's gods and goddesses and time travel and like all of that gets mixed up, and it's kind of hard to follow in my opinion. But once again, like you play the story like once in Diablo 4, right, and then you're done, you move on and you never think about it again. Now it's just loot chase, and so at the end of the day the story is a non-factor. But I do think in Last Epoch, I'd imagine, I don't 100% know this, but that the story is going to continue with each like season of the game. Each cycle of the game is what they call it, versus Diablo's story only really continues each expansion. So every year you get like a big story update. Whereas Last Epoch, I'd imagine they're going to expand the world every cycle, which is every 3 months they do a new season.
Right. Yeah, I love the cinematics from Diablo. They were killer. I mean, I remember right before D4, I was watching tons of lore videos, and I'm sure that the lore here in Last Epoch is pretty deep. So far, I think the most intriguing factor is, going across the different time zones, the different eras, and how it does change the enemy types. But I actually want to get into gameplay at this point. One of the biggest differences that I've seen from D4 and from Last Epoch is the skill trees.
Yeah, skill trees are crazy. And I think it's going to be like the most prominent thing somebody coming from Diablo into Last Epoch is going to notice right off the bat. Like, if you've played Diablo 4, you have that skill tree that goes up, and like you pick, like in the beginning, you got one of 4 skills, and then that branches off into like 2 choices or something like that. And that's it. And then you kind of go down the tree with a handful of different skills. But not this game. This game, the devs were like, we're going to put 120 skills in the game, and all of those skills are going to have a completely open skill tree. So you've got 120 skills. I think it's 130 skills total across 5 classes. So it's like 26 skills for each class, and every single one of them have their own skill trees. And you're able to specialize in 5 total skills, and when you specialize in them, it lets you gain points for those trees as you progress through the game. And this opens up an unbelievable amount of build variety, even within like each skill. Like, there are so many different ways you can change a skill, and I have some examples here that I use on my mage character that I've been playing since the game's been out. Like a simple thing like teleport. There's a teleport skill in Diablo 4. It's really simple. You just click where you want to teleport and you teleport there. It's used for movement to get around faster. That's really what it's used for in Diablo 4. In this game, you can kind of change it to do whatever the heck you want. You can use it as a movement skill, which is what I do, but I also use it as a movement skill that helps me freeze enemies because I have an ice build. But you can also build it in a way that summons mirror images of yourself to taunt enemies, and then you can make a weird hybrid mage minion build, or you can use teleport to cast a completely different skill that also has its skill tree, so you're like comboing skills together. Or you can use it as a knockback skill, so you can push enemies around. Or you can use it as a defensive skill with like damage reduction and cooldown reduction and shields. Or you can literally just mix all of that together with the points you have to make some like weird version of teleport. And that's all just within one of the 130 skills in the game. And that's like, it's pretty unbelievable when you start like getting into the game and tinkering around and like learning how it works, to see like really what you can do with 5 skills, all of them having the possibility to combo into each other or to change them completely. It's definitely something that not a lot of other action RPGs have done. And this is like the best skill system I've seen in any action RPG that I've ever played.
Oh, it's incredible, dude. Like, I was just in my brief period of playing this game, I was like, whoa, this has a tree, that has a tree. There's like trees on trees. They're everywhere. And every skill, just so much depth to each one of them. And I was already seeing like different ways to combo. I just feel like just looking at it, just bare bones looking at it from here, it looks like thousands of hours of gameplay to perfect a build for yourself.
For sure. And one thing I will point out is that it does look more complicated, obviously, than Diablo, and is more complicated, but they do explain very well how things work, how you put points into things, and there's a whole game guide built into the game, which we talked about before, is that like if you don't know how something works in the game, there is a built-in game guide that you just can search any phrase, any type of damage or any system or mechanic, and it'll give you a paragraph of like exactly how this works. And there's a lot of like really helpful tools in the game that make it so you don't have to go out to other sites to like look up things. Like I remember at Diablo 4, you'd have so many websites. You have a website to like better plan a build. You have a website to better plan your Paragon boards. You have a website to track the hell tides for the end game. You have a website to track what boss drops what loot. Like you don't need any of that. You don't need any like community created websites. It's all just in the game. So it's very understandable, which I think is good. And then another thing the skills do really well and builds do really well is that because there's so much variety in the game, you don't have what you have with Diablo 4, where you need like the meta, right? The meta is like Frost, Sorcerer, and D4 or whatever it was in Season 1. And like there was like 2 versions of that, and that's what you had to play if you were a Sorcerer for that season, because it's the best. In this, like, I'm an Ice Mage, and there's so many different ways you can approach an Ice Mage, where not any 2 builds are going to look the same. So, and the game isn't that difficult either, I will say. The game isn't that difficult right now, and I think over time they'll add, more like super difficult activities. But right now it's not that difficult, so being able to jump in, just experiment and tinker around, and there's really no barriers to respeccing either, so you can kind of change up skills, when you want to mess around with things to try new stuff out. And just experimenting is like one of the coolest things, because you learn all these new synergies that you did not see, maybe going through it like 10 or 20 levels previously.
Yeah. Well, I love that you bring that up, because one thing I noticed right when Diablo first launched, like I was playing Necro, I was trying out my minion build. I realized very quickly, like, that wasn't the meta build. The meta build was Bone Spear. And the issue was I found myself running with other Necros, and we were all running the same build. Like we all had the same bone build. And there might have been some small variations, but we were all chasing the same affixes. We were all chasing the same items, and to make that bone build the best. And that was the meta at that time. But when I look at Last Epoch, I just don't see it, unless something is just really an outlier sandbox-wise. There's just so much variety. I don't know how you can come across someone that has the exact same build as yours.
Yeah, I don't think you will, unless you're, there are build guides just like there are in every game. Like you could go to, plethora of websites that do like Diablo 4 build guides, and they're doing things for Last Epoch as well. But I think it's okay for those to exist, because some people don't like, going through and creating their own thing. They want to just know that they're making something good right off the bat without messing around for hours or like reading through skills and things like that. But yeah, nobody's going to have the exact same build at all, I don't think. And like, because there's so much that alters skills, it's not even like the active skills, the 26 skills that you have for each class. Then you have the passive skill trees as well. Like you have every class has a base passive skill tree that they build into, and then around level 15 or so, you get to choose a mastery, which is you mastering in one of 3 subclasses. And when you master in a subclass, you get an entire new passive tree for that subclass, as well as unlocking half of the passive trees for the subclasses that you didn't choose a mastery in. So now you've got like 100 plus passives to also choose from over the course of your like 1 to 100 leveling.
That's wild. On
top of the other skill trees, on top of unique items, which can also change your skills, on top of comboing skills. Like, for example, as I was going through and just playing and like reading skills, I noticed that there's actual combos within the trees that you can build into. Like my mage build has a combo with 2 of the skills that I use. So when I use one of the skills, the other one has a chance to instantly cast without me manually casting it. And because I use that one spell for more so character buffs, not necessarily for damage, it allows me to completely ignore casting that one skill. I can just take it off my hotbar completely, even though I've specialized it, because the other skill, I've built it into it so much so that it'll cast the one skill for free. So it's like a 2-in-1 combo, which I didn't even know existed until I was like, really reading into skills and trying to figure out like what's the best thing that I could do for what I need it for. So there's multiple combos where you're really just building into, like there's another one where it's a movement skill for the mage where you like turn into a fireball and you like dash forward and then explode at the end of it. And then there's a skill that creates like a frost wall where you can freeze enemies. But there's a combo that if you build into both of those skills and you use the movement fireball traversal skill to hit the frost wall, it creates a bigger explosion. It gives you like double crit chance and stuff like that. So like there's tons of these out there. Like this is just a mage. I haven't touched any of the other classes so far.
Right. No, that's awesome to hear. Another big difference, and I know we talked about this the other day on stream, it was about how itemization works. The game is not constantly throwing higher damage or higher armor gear onto you like other ARPGs or looters in general. Instead, you've got like a ton of base items for each class, for each slot, with stats that never change, resulting in mainly a fixed hunting versus just equipping gear because it has higher numbers.
Yeah, the gear system itemization is definitely something that's new for me in terms of, because Diablo has always been see green number, see higher number, equip it, move on. Until you get to the end game where you start like really looking at the affixes versus necessarily just numbers. But yeah, in this game, you have a suite of base items for each class, and they all have what's called implicit stats. So there's stats at the top of the item box, and these stats don't ever change. And it allows you to find certain items that fit your build without you having to constantly swap out the items because like a number went up a little bit or something like that. And so what you end up looking for are the affixes. Affixes are what you're searching for. Affixes are what changes on items. They're broken down to prefixes and suffixes. So you have two prefixes, two suffixes. And the higher the rarity of the items, basically the more affixes you get, up to like 4 total until you start messing with like the end game. And so in this game you have 6 main rarities. So you got common, magic, rare, uniques. Uniques have like their own set affixes. Oftentimes they have unique affixes that don't appear on anything else, and these usually alter your skills. You also have set items in this game, which Diablo 4 doesn't have right now, which is they're like uniques in the way that they have their own stats, but you get increased benefits for wearing more of a set, like 2, 3, or 4 pieces.
Right.
And then you have exalted items, which are the 6th rarity. They're more so an endgame rarity, and they drop with 3 to 4 affixes, but one of those affixes will be a higher tier. So you end up searching for affixes that have high tiers. So each affix in the game can have or has 7 tiers of like power, and the higher the affix tier, the more potent it is. So exalteds are the only items that can drop with the highest tiers, those being 6 and 7 of affixes, and you can't craft affix tiers 6 or 7 onto gear. So exalteds are like what you're really looking for those high affix drops. And then after that you have legendary items, which we'll get into later. But for example, as far as the implicits go, a silver ring is a base ring type, and the implicit is 6% increased movement speed, and then you could find that in the beginning of the game. And then as an example of how these don't ever change, I found you could find a unique silver ring like at level 70, and that same 6% increased movement speed is what you're going to have. So those never change. What changes are just the affixes. So that way, when you after playing for a while, you start to learn what a silver ring is, what a ruby amulet is, and what the implicits are. So you start to begin to realize like what you don't want to pick up, what you don't want to use without having to endlessly sift through every single piece of gear that drops.
Well, I love that you bring that up, because I was already noticing like yesterday when I was playing, I was like, wow, there's just a lot of loot. And then y'all brought up the loot filter system they have. And dude, that is just so detailed, because you can literally choose exactly what you want to see when it drops.
Yeah, loot filter is super powerful. Most games, most action RPGs, you have to like mod in loot filters or something like that. Or like Diablo 4 doesn't have one. And they definitely need one, because like you don't want to see, loot in Diablo. Like you're strictly looking for, once you get to the end game, like specific things. You don't want to go through and sift through all this stuff. You don't want to see it at all. In this game is definitely like, they have one of the most in-depth loot filters out there. And because you don't have to pick up everything, and there is a reason as well, like we'll get back to loot filters in a second, but I want to talk about what this like kind of, what the loot filters and what the implicits and how there isn't an increase in numbers all the time, like what it does for the game. And it really limits the time that you spend in your inventory and the amount of time you're spending swapping in and out gear because you're not getting those constant number increases like you would in Diablo. And because the possibility of like those base number increases not existing, you're not inclined to pick up every single piece of gear like we said. So once you start to learn those implicits, because they don't change, you know what not to look for. And then because of this, the devs made the loot not sell for lots of gold in the game. So you're already not inclined to pick everything up because not everything's going to be good for you, but now it doesn't sell for gold either. So this decreases the amount of time you would have to spend going back to town and selling all your stuff and then going. So this like lets you like play the game. This system lets you see what you want, chuck all the stuff on the ground, not have to worry about picking it up, filling your inventory all the time. And it takes away, that huge inventory management that all the other games, have a lot of. So you can actually play the game most of the time. And then the loot filter on top of that makes it even better. Like if you don't want to see white and blue items, you can filter those out. If you want to find a specific affix, you can make it so you see that specific affix even though it's a blue, and you can change the color of what that item will look like when it drops if you want it to be hot pink, so you like really know it's something that you have been looking for. So the loot filter does crazy things, and there's so many rules and stuff that you can add and make it your own, or if you don't want to, you can just import one offline that somebody else has made. And it's really interesting because it helps you with crafting, and crafting is a huge part of this game, and we'll get to that here in a second.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that you brought up crafting, and that is something from like Destiny and other games. Like when it comes to like a looter-based game, crafting is one of those things. It's like, should you have it? Should you not? Does that take away from hunting that god roll? And that was a debate that we had in Destiny too. And for years now, since Witch Queen, people have asked, has weapon crafting ruined Destiny? Now, personally, I love weapon crafting in Destiny. I think that it's a good thing. It mitigates that RNG. It gives you a separate grind, and we have that mix of RNG, roll drops, and craftable weapons. That's all kind of mixed in together. Could you dive into the crafting though of how it works in Last Epoch?
Crafting is a very big part of the game. Like I personally, when I saw that the game had crafting, was not big into it. I like, things coming from drops. I like the RNG of like finding a god roll. I never liked the idea of being able to just create what I wanted. But this game has RNG within the crafting system. So it's fun in that way. And it's a huge part of the game, even in the early game, in the mid game, in the end game especially. So how crafting really works is, like we said earlier, each item can have 4 affixes. So even commons, like white items, you can throw them into the crafting system and add 4 affixes to it, with currencies, and it'll change the rarity from a white to a blue to a yellow. And in order to craft certain affixes that you want, there needs to be those empty slots available on an item, and you need to have the affix shards for that specific affix. So like if you want to put cold resistance on an item, you need to have cold resistance shards, and these shards exist for literally the hundreds of affixes in the game. And affixes or affix shards drop as you play, but you can also get them from just like straight up shattering. There's like a mechanic in the game that lets you break down an item to get a chance at obtaining the affix shards of the affixes that were on that item. So the big mechanic here with crafting is something called forging potential. So you basically, like, you could argue right now, like, if you can just take a white and make it into what you want, why wouldn't you do that? And the reason is forging potential. So each item that drops has a number tied to it. That's its forging potential. And this basically lowers, this number will lower every time you try to craft or do a craft on said item. And once it hits 0, then you cannot craft with it anymore. So this is why blue items, for example, can be really good in the early game, even late game, because if you get a blue item that has 2 affixes that you want, you can then easily add 2 more affixes that you want to those empty slots and have, a 4 out of 4 roll for a weapon or for a piece of armor. And that's easy to do with forging potential, but it's a lot harder with whites because you would have to then craft 4 times with it to be able to get 4 things that you want. So that's why like blues can be good in this game. Like you're not just immediately ignoring blues like 5 levels into the game like you will in Diablo 4. So you have those affixes and you have how that works. Now there are like other rules, tons of rules to the crafting, and there's tons of currencies that like alter crafts. Like we said, you have the affix shards that let you add affixes, but they also let you upgrade the tiers of affixes so you can increase their potency. You have like runes that modify crafts. These can let you shatter items like we said, but there's rare ones that let you straight up just upgrade an item to a unique, or re-rolling the implicits, or doing tons of other things to said item. And then you also have support glyphs, and these can decrease the amount of forging potential each craft will use. There's ones that will upgrade the tier of an affix, but then change the affix at the same time. So that way, if you have, like, for example, all 4 slots on the affixes are full, and you want to change one to something else, you would use this glyph because you would upgrade the affix as well as change it and possibly get something that you would like. And then there's even a super rare glyph that I've only gotten a couple times that gives you the chance to seal an affix, what they call sealing an affix. And this moves that affix to its own slot, which opens up the place it was in previously, giving you the potential to have 5 different affixes on one item instead of the max, which is 4. So there's a ton of like stuff with crafting.
There's so much depth, yeah.
And not even one more thing. This is where it gets nutso. Is my favorite crafting mechanic is the reward you get from an endgame dungeon. You get access to a machine that allows you to combine a unique item and an exalted item together. And this fuses the items, creating a legendary, which is the highest rarity. It's the only way you get legendaries mainly. It creates a legendary version of your unique with some of the affixes of the exalted that you combined with it. So this creates your own item. This is like your own tailored to you legendary that nobody else has.
Oh, that's trippy, dude.
Yeah, it's cool how they make it work too, because it's like the dungeon is time travel based. So throughout the dungeon, you're going from the past to the future. So you go to the past and you put these two items into this machine, and then you time travel to the future where they've been sitting for decades, and that's why they're fused together.
Oh my god.
And then you take it out. It's pretty dope.
That is dope.
That's like the end game. That's the end game. Like you're crafting legendary gear for yourself.
Right. So before we get into like talking about end game, what you're really telling me though, as far as like the blue items and stuff, is like from the very beginning, you can already be finding things that you can keep in your gear sets, in your builds for a very long time, and continue to find ways to make them good even into the late into end game, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like, for example, like, but it's because the implicits don't change. Like I found like a scepter on my mage that has, the base implicits are like 13 spell damage and 3 melee damage. And then I have a unique scepter now in endgame. It's the same. It's 13 spell damage, 3 melee damage. Which the only thing that's changing are the affixes. So you don't have to worry about your weapon being out damaged eventually by something else. It's just affixes that matter. So yeah, you can do a lot of things in this game that you wouldn't do in other games, which is keep gear for long periods of time, or buy things from merchants. Like in the beginning, when I start, I go and check the merchants in the beginning. Usually in these games, you don't buy things from the merchants. You just don't do it because like you're going to find things that replace them immediately, but not in this. If you see an item that a merchant is selling that's blue and it has 2 stats on it that you want, buy it, craft 2 more stats onto it. You got a yellow that you're going to keep for a long time.
I love that. I love that things don't just get eliminated literally every single hour. And you keep leveling until you get to a certain level, and it's just like you've got this graveyard of items that you've left behind. And yes, there's a part of me that really gets that dopamine high, but it starts to fatigue after a while. But I think with all the depth that's involved with the skills, I feel like they made this system this way because of all the depth that's there. And not that there's not depth in the build crafting, of course, but considering there's just so many different ways you can go with builds, having the ability to take an item early on and level it up to use in in-game is really, really nice. Now, I want to kind of jump into in-game real quick. Now, you talked about fusing those high rarity items, which is crazy. Now, how does the in-game dungeon allow us to do that work? And are dungeons in this game similar to Diablo dungeons? I know you mentioned like the time travel, putting the weapons in the past and whatnot.
Yeah, so Endgame between Diablo 4 and Last Epoch is like night and day. Most of the Endgame has mechanics that don't exist in the regular version of Last Epoch, if you want to call it that. In the early to mid game, the Endgame has a ton of systems that completely change, like truly change the game. And Endgame starts around like level 60, at least for me. So like you're looking at like 22 hours to reach that mark for anybody who's like interested in, potentially jumping into Last Epoch. But so yeah, Endgame is you're hunting for better and better items, you're crafting more powerful gear, and you're really starting to iron out your build with the skill points you get as you finish like the remaining levels, right? So dungeons for sure do not act the same as Diablo. Like Diablo has like 130 dungeons or whatever, and they're all essentially the same thing, right? You're just running the dungeon. Yeah, there's different enemies, different like small tasks to do, but you get to the end, you kill a boss, and you're done. And there's some modifiers and things in there as well that change what enemies deal damage and some buffs and things like that. Dungeons in this, there's 3 dungeons in this game currently. That's it, just 3. All of them work completely different, and they all have completely unique rewards that are systems you don't see anywhere else, like the ability to fuse items together. So we'll get to dungeons in a second. You got the 3 dungeons. Those are some of the endgame activities. You also have the Monoliths of Fate, which is the main endgame activity, I'd say. Then you have an arena, which is another endgame activity. And then you have factions, which is an endgame system that we'll talk about. I think we'll talk about factions first, because they kind of lead into
yes, because we
stuff.
Talked about, and this was so trippy, you telling me about factions, because you could swap between the 2. Is it 2 different factions?
Yep. 2 factions, Merchant's Guild and the Circle of Fortune. And you hit these factions, you get to choose a faction a little bit before endgame, but they mainly add to the endgame experience. And so what they do is, it's honestly pretty crazy how this works. It's one of the coolest and most innovative things I think they've actually made, and it really solves the question of trade in action RPGs, and that's kind of like a thing that has been a discussion for a while in terms of action RPGs. Is, do we want to have an open trading system in the game? Do we want players to be able to trade anything they want, or trade nothing at all, or have like a balance in between? And this is where the factions idea came from. And this is the first time this has ever been done in action RPG. This has never been done in any other action RPG. So you get to choose. You get the Merchant's Guild and the Circle of Fortune. The Merchant's Guild, if you join the faction, it opens up the bazaar for player trading. So here you can get your loot, if you want, just completely off the trade market. And before anybody asks, real money has nothing to do with this. This isn't a Diablo 3 scenario auction house where you can spend real money on items. This is all in-game gold. So if you are that kind of player who likes the idea of buying and selling, if you find something that's cool and you want to sell it for gold, or you want to buy things and you want to get your items off a trade, you can do that. But if you do that, you don't get access to the other faction. The other faction is the Circle of Fortune. This adds a mechanic called constellations, which let you target specific loot drops. So you can either go the route of trade with the Merchant's Guild and be able to get loot that way, or increase your drop rates, essentially, if you don't like the trade idea. And when you choose one of these factions, there's ranks that you'll progress through as you complete quests and kill enemies. You get favor, and you'll level up these ranks, and each rank provides you with more benefits for that faction. More potential loot drops, or more trade benefits, like being able to trade unique items or legendaries and things like that. And you can always swap factions as well. So if you are on the Merchants Guild and you trade for a while and you want to see what the constellations, have on offer, you can swap. But what happens is, let's say I buy an item off the trade market when I'm part of the Merchants Guild. When I move over to the Circle of Fortune faction, I can no longer use that item. So it gets like tagged with like a Merchants Guild icon. So when you can only use the items that you obtain from a certain faction while you're in that faction. So this makes it so you can't increase your loot drops with the one faction and then swap just to sell them on the market.
Sure.
I want to touch on constellations a bit more with the Circle of Fortune. So this is like really targeting specific loot drops. And this is like this cool system that has this new area with like telescopes pointing at the sky. And you can target specific items, weapons, armor, jewelry, relics, idols. Like you have all these different items that you can target. And the way it works is you have different lenses that increase the focusing potential. And kind of how it works is if you want, like, for example, when I first did it, I wanted unique shields or higher rarity shields. So I tried to focus into shields, and I found a constellation that offered 2 unique shields if I were to do this objective, basically. So it's like, go to this place, do an objective, then you get this. And that's how the focusing works. And this really stacks. I was watching a video just earlier today where when you start to rank up that faction and start really using the focusing that you can do with the lenses, you are talking like you can double, triple, quadruple up on these constellations that have like multiple of them pop at once. So you get like this huge like Borderlands style loot explosion from like a boss or something like that, where you're getting like 10, 20, 30 unique set pieces and things like that. So it's like, it can be really good, but to rank up the factions, it takes a long time. It is a big grind to rank up the factions. So that's kind of how that works. It's a little bit more in depth than that, but we'll be here all day if I talk about it.
Right. Well, I'm so glad they give us the option to go between the two, because they both sound absolutely amazing. And I remember when you first told me about this, I was like, dude, this just solved all real-world trading, because that's always an issue when it comes to any game. It's like, is if it has free trade, right? Is how long will it take before real-world trading starts to take place? I bring up RuneScape a lot, but it was all over the place with RuneScape, which led to bots and everything else. But one thing I do want to bring up, and I was told this yesterday, and can you confirm this? If you're in the Merchant Guild?
Yep.
If you're in the Merchant Guild, you can only buy an item once, right? Like you can't sell that item once you've bought it, correct? Or you can only sell it once.
That's what it seems like. That's what I've heard as well. I haven't jumped into the Merchants Guild yet because I've been messing with constellations so much. But yeah, that seems like what I've been told. And obviously, if it's not that, I can put something in the video when I edit this back. But yeah,
that's interesting,
I've heard
though.
that. Yeah.
So say a rare drop, drops for you, you sell it, somebody buys it, that's it. It's locked in. It almost sounds like it like soul binds to you. Yep. That's interesting. And I wonder why that is. Is that just another way to just make sure to tamp down on real-world trading?
Yeah, it could be. As far as I know, the devs have done a lot of like talk about designing this system, with the community. And I haven't been like 100% focused on the early access development. But I'm sure they've answered the question somewhere as to like why it is how it is. And to be quite honest, like when they announced the faction system, people loved it. Like the idea, people were all over it because there's always been like it's always split 50-50, people who want trade, people who don't.
Yeah.
So being able to appease both sides in a way that's fun and still rewarding is pretty cool. So I'd imagine there's reasons for it. I don't exactly know what they are. That's one of the parts of the game I need to dive into more is the Merchants Guild, because that is a beast I don't know too much about.
Sure.
Well, specifics wise.
Just listening to this and hearing this, I wish if this is really a system that hits and is a home run here for Last Epoch, dude, I want to see this in other games. I can only imagine. Destiny, I know is a different animal and stuff, but people have been asking for years, can we get trading in Destiny? And I've always scratched my head and thought, no, I don't think that would ever work for Destiny. But when I see a system like this, because they're giving you two avenues that are both filled with benefits, I love that. I love that they have both these areas that you can go down. And then if, for instance, you can only trade something once, that's another thing that really just locks things in place and keeps things from getting out of control in that free market scenario. So I love this system. This is a clear win from the developers here. I've never heard of anything like this, even amongst MRPGs. I'm trying to think here. I don't think I've heard of anything like this amongst MRPGs either. So this is a new one for me, and I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show like the innovation with these, like, from the skills, from the crafting to this new factions thing, and then the end game activities, which we'll talk about in a second. They're just innovating left, right, and center on everything that they possibly can to be a game. They're not out to kill Diablo, right? They just wanted to make, this is coming from, like I had said in the past to you, is that this was a team of Reddit or, people on Reddit who were like, hey, we should get together and make a better action RPG, one that's community driven. And then here we are 5 years later. So they're trying to like do something new for the genre, which is nice to see, after, the time and time again, Blizzard not doing that with almost basically the genre they created. And like, we can move on if you want to the end game activities.
Sure.
Like,
well, that also brings me to like the rest of the in game experience. I know you've explained a good chunk of it, but could you continue there?
Yeah, so we'll talk Monoliths of Fate. So we'll try to run through Monoliths of Fate because there's a lot that goes on with this endgame activity. It's essentially, this is where like a lot of the time travel comes into play. So Monoliths of Fate is basically you have 10 different timelines, and you start out with, they essentially act as like levels. You start out with one timeline, but as you conquer a timeline, more of them unlock, and they like connect together in this big web of timelines. So when you begin a Monolith run, it's kind of like procedurally generated or randomly generated levels that all have modifiers, and all have rewards tied to them that you can actually see. So you have this big web of like floating locations in space, and you can see, you start out in this one central location, and you can pick one of these echoes is what they're called, that you want to go to and branch out to, and it'll tell you like, these have modifiers for enemies, increased damage, things like that. They also have buffs to you, like increased rewards or increased experience. And then they have like a set reward tied to it. Like this one will give you more gold. This one will give you a unique ring. This one will give you a set item. This one will give you extra experience. So like you can plan out like where you want to go, because you can kind of see multiples of these locations as they branch out. So you can see like kind of putting a path together, like which one you want to go to first. And each of these levels are pretty simple. Like you load into it, you kill a bunch of enemies, you kill a boss, and then you get the reward, and then you move on. But what you're doing at the same time is every time you complete one of these echoes and you're like branching your path through this timeline, getting the rewards that you want, you're increasing the timeline's stability, which is like a bar at the top. And when you fully fill the bar, you fight a big boss, basically. And then once you kill this big boss, you get another progression mechanic, which are called blessings. So each of these 10 timelines have a set number of blessings that you can get. So once you defeat and conquer a timeline, you defeat this boss, the game's gonna be like, hey, pick between these 5 blessings or 3 blessings, something like that. And these are passive buffs that apply across the game to your character. And these are things like, just strong stat bumps or things that help you get more loot. Like I think the first one I got was like 12% increased chance to find unique items.
Oh, wow.
And that's just across the game entirely. And there's like 400 unique items in this game. So like there's a ton. So like that's always good to have more drop hits on those. So like that's essentially really quickly how the monoliths work. And when you conquer a monolith, it like branches out into or conquer a timeline, it branches out into 2 more timelines. And the level recommendation increases every time. So the difficulty gets harder and harder as you go, but each timeline has different blessing rewards, and throughout each timeline as you're doing them, you can pick your rewards for each echo in between, like inside each timeline. This is kind of what I've heard is like a spin on Path of Exile. They do something called mapping or maps. It's an endgame activity in Path of Exile. This is kind of a spin on what those are, is what I understand it. So they're really fun to do, and you've got like, you can empower these timelines, which give you like hot like blessings that have like higher stats, which I haven't even gotten to that yet. So like that's another step of the way for endgame that I haven't done. So that's the main activity for endgame,
Gotcha.
right? So those they're pretty cool, and you can like sit there and just do them for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And you know, each echo has different enemy types, different bosses. You know, you're in different time periods. So it's pretty cool. I do enjoy it a lot. I think it's way better than anything Diablo 4 has endgame wise.
Oh, sounds
just
like it.
Just on its own, just that, without even talking about the other things, it's better. And then the other thing is like, you have you want an endless wave based endgame activity. They have that called the arena. You want to just sit there and endlessly fight waves of enemies and until you die and see how long you last. That's
so that's just unlimited.
You want leaderboards?
Is arena just unlimited there?
Yeah, there's different levels of it, and you could choose a endless one, and then you could like rank on the leaderboards.
Oh, nice.
Right? In Diablo 4, they don't have leaderboards yet. They're still waiting on it. It comes like in a week or two.
Wow.
After, you know, the game's being out this long. So there's leaderboards with the arena system. You can choose to do endless, or you can do, you know, 30 or 40 waves, and then as you complete each wave, you get different modifiers that alter the difficulty and increase the rewards, basically.
That's amazing, man. Dude, you're just hyping me up right now to play this game.
Bro, we haven't even got to the dungeons, dude. Dungeons.
Okay.
We're going to run through these really quick. You ready? There's 3 dungeons. One is called the Lightless Arbor. Okay, this is a dungeon that is focused on this darkness and light mechanic. You have this crystal over your head, basically, that's providing light. And enemies that are near you or near the light, near the crystal, deal less damage and take more damage. But if they're in the darkness and far away from you, they deal more damage to you. And there's this mechanic where if you're like an up-close melee character, you keep the light, you keep the crystal on you, and you melee everything, you kill everything. You try to get to them before they can shoot you from a distance to deal more damage. But if you're a ranged character, or you want to play more strategically, you can move the crystal off of you into the distance. Like there's a button that lets you move it to where you click. So if you want to move the crystal to enemies to put the light on them so you can damage them from a distance to deal more damage to them. So there's this whole crystal mechanic, and as you take damage, the light gets dimmer. And when the light goes fully out or dims, you take more damage because the light isn't as big. It isn't covering a wider area, so all these enemies are in the darkness and they're dealing more damage to you. And the way you increase the light is you kill these like giant crystal creatures that refill that light on your head. And that's how the whole dungeon works. And at the end of this dungeon, the reward is something called the Vault, which is essentially a gold sink. Where you sink your gold in the game is the Vault, if you're not buying items through the Merchant's Guild. The Vault is like, you get to the end, and there's this big face on a door, and it like asks you questions. It's like, do you want this in the chests that are in the Vault? Like, do you want these items in the chests? You either say yes or no. You accept or decline, but if you decline, the price increases. Like the gold cost to get the next reward increases. And you keep doing that over and over and over and over, and it keeps asking you more and more. And this gold costs substantially jumps. Like I only had 100k gold when I went in there, and it was telling me like that things were costing like 500k, 400k, as like you keep going, because you can keep sinking gold into it endlessly until you don't have gold anymore. And then when you finally hit open vault, it'll give you a ton of chests with all the things that you picked, all the things that you bought. And there's like options to like duplicate the chest, duplicate the items in the chest, triplicate the chest, quadruplicate the chests. Like you could just keep getting, and so this is where you sink your gold basically. So that's the only place where you can find the vault is in this dungeon. So that's really cool. You have also the second dungeon is the Soulfire Bastion. Has an interesting mechanic that you have to switch between a fire and necrotic damage immunity using a currency that you get from within the dungeon. So as you kill enemies in the dungeon, you get a currency called Soul Embers, and the entire dungeon is full of enemies that deal necrotic and fire damage, as well as fire traps. So you have this immunity bubble around you that you're able to change from a fire immunity to a necrotic immunity, but it costs the Soul Ember currency that you get from killing enemies within the dungeon. So if you're going across fire traps, you want to switch to the fire immunity. If you're going up against necrotic enemies, you want to switch to the necrotic immunity. And the switch is like on the fly, it's just a button press. But this spends the embers that you get. And the merchant at the end, when you defeat this dungeon, requires those embers to gamble with him. So it's like this risk reward of you playing strategically so you don't spend all your currency within the dungeon to survive. So you have enough to gamble at the end. And it even comes into play, like the boss is really tough because he's got like huge waves of necrotic and fire damage that if you don't swap, it's like a one-shot. So that's really cool as well. Like all these mechanics don't come into play. Like these are just dungeon specific things that are completely unique to. And when you like gamble with this guy at the end, like you can gamble for, it's just armor, weapons, or whatever, and it's kind of a mystery. And then when you get it, they could be uniques, they could be set items, they could be exalted items. Like, so it really just depends on your luck. And then the last one is the Temporal Sanctum dungeon, which is where you get the Eternity cache at the end, where you can fuse your weapons together. And then the whole like gimmick for this dungeon is it is time travel based. So you don't have to load, you don't have to go like through a load screen like you do in like the regular version of the game. When you're time traveling through the story, there's like a loading screen. In this, it's instantaneous. So it works as a way, like if you're fighting an enemy in the past and you're getting beat up, you can just time travel out of there and go to the future, and you don't gotta fight it anymore.
Oh, that's trippy.
And then it also works into like traversal of the dungeon. Sometimes there's blocked paths, so if you can't get through a
time
gate,
travel,
then you go back in time or forward in time,
and
then you can go through it. So it allows for you to like traverse the dungeon in different ways. And then at the boss as well, the boss fight revolves around you dodging like screen-wide attacks by going back and forward in time. And then you get the Eternity cache at the end, which allows you to combine those two weapons to make your own stuff. So, and then like there's every single one of these dungeons, you have different versions. So as far as when you level up, you unlock higher levels of each of these dungeons. And also like in between each dungeon, you'll find like doors that lead you into the next area, and each door adds a modifier to the dungeon. So I kind of skipped over that. And then these modifiers make it harder, but also change the rewards at the end. You know, they make the gambling guy like re-roll the stats on the item so you always get higher percentages, or they make it so gold cost with the gold sink is a little bit less and things like that. And then one other thing is that each dungeon requires keys to get in, so you can't just endlessly repeat them. You have to find keys that are one-time uses to enter the dungeons. And there is like at the end of when I got to the end game, I had like 20 keys. So like they're not like super hard to get, and I do believe you can focus keys using the faction constellation, like the constellation faction. You can focus to get keys as drops as well, so which is pretty nice. And that's it. That's the end game.
Dude, that is a lot though. I mean, that's a lot. When you first told me 3 dungeons, I was kind of like, yeah, you know, especially coming from like Diablo, like it's like, all right, that doesn't seem like a lot, you know what I mean? But as you explain them, my Lord, the depth. It's not even that. It's like there's games within games of the dungeons. Like there's like the different mechanics, the fact that you have to conserve those items you were talking about before you get to the boss. But obviously not be too conservative, because if you die, you die, right? That's crazy though. Yeah. I don't know which in-game activity sounds more fun, but I love that there's so much variety to choose from. But Jared, we've been talking a lot on this. Is there any other miscellaneous things that you want to talk about with the people to let them know other things about Last Epoch that they should know about?
Yeah, one of them is offline mode, right? You know this, I know this. There's been issues with the game at launch, and which is something else I want to talk about because I think it's something that other reviewers like aren't really diving into. And like, I know a bit more about the issues with the launch. You know that servers, I know that servers were rough the first couple days, and then they have this issue with like loading screens and loading times being really long, and that's not because of server issues, because some like weird bug that they're trying to squash. I just want to go on the record and say that for anybody that's hearing negative stuff on this game about it being, waste of time or bad or whatever, when big games come out, AAA games come out and there's launch issues or there's long queue times with Destiny or things like that, people love to instantly shit all over devs and they love to like get pissed off and get angry. And I think, for like most AAA, like big budget, Activision, games, Activision Blizzard, things like that, it's easier to get angry because, right, they're these huge companies that should be able to like make sure that something like this stuff doesn't happen. And then you have the idea where people are like, well, this game is just a cash grab. They got your money. Now they don't have to like fix things. I wanted to just go out on the record that as far as like me following this game for a long time, on and off, but they've been testing like I told you a couple days ago, they've been testing like the multiplayer features, and they've been testing server stress and making sure that the game launches in a good state with multiplayer. And just something like this is unfortunate that it happens. Right. But I want to say this is not a this is a development team that's out to get your money and then like dip off the face of the planet. Like, this is a team that's been making an action RPG built around the community and what the community wanted out of it, right? This is the exact opposite of like Blizzard, right? And just like dropping a game and it sucking. This is like, they're actively like trying to be the opposite of that, and they're trying to build something that people can play and people like and people are part of the development of. So like something like these launch issues is unfortunate, but I will say that they have been testing this stuff for months, and it's just unlucky that something like this happens. And they've basically went on, Reddit and things like that and explained what's been going on, and they've been getting like, I don't know if they've been getting death threats, but they've taken like the employees off of the Discord, so you can't like talk to them anymore because they've been getting so much hate and things like that. Tough. And it's just like, it's so rough to see after knowing like and following how much they've been trying to make sure launch is good. But you have all these people that have never heard of the game, and IGN's reviewing and they're like, oh, let me test it out, or let me go. And then they're seeing these issues without knowing like the history of it. So I do want to say that there is an offline mode in the game, and the offline mode is everything the online mode has, except you can't play co-op and you can't transfer your character from offline to online. Every cycle or season that hits the game can be played in offline. So you don't have to like play online to play the new content that gets added. Unlike Diablo 4 or Path of Exile, I don't think either of those have an offline mode. Most games that are like this don't have offline modes anymore. So it's cool that they do have one. And most of my time playing was in the offline mode, for anybody that needs to know that for review purposes or whatever. I played mostly everything in the offline mode, but it is the exact same game. You can't do the player trading with the guilds, obviously, so that's why I don't have experience with that. The last thing I do want to mention is something that you probably didn't know.
What's that?
This game has infinite stash.
Oh, that's crazy. Who does that? Does anyone else?
Path of Exile might, because they do have a lot of stuff in their game, so that they might do that. But infinite stash, you can buy stash tabs with in-game gold. Has a crazy search stash feature where you can sort everything out, rename stash tabs, recolor stash tabs, search any phrase in your stash to find any item with a certain like tool tip, and you could just infinitely stash whatever the heck you want.
Dude, that is, as someone who's vault inside of Destiny, I'm literally looking at it right now. It's $5.99 out of 600. Nothing pleases me more than to take a crap ton of loot and stick it in a stash or a bank vault or something. And dude, sometimes I just like to just look at it all. You know, yeah, sure, 95% of those things I probably don't use, right? But I just want to look at it all. And the fact that Last Epoch is saying, dude, store all of it, unlimited storage here, unlimited stash, that's incredible. And I actually wonder like how they're able to even achieve that just from like a game engine perspective.
No idea. I know the issue with like Diablo 4 is that they came out and said that like when you load into a town, you're loading your stash, but you're also loading every other player's stash that's in that town. And people are like, why? Why would you do that? And I think maybe that's the same with Destiny because they have the same issue. So I wonder if that's the same thing. When you load into the tower, you're not only loading your vault, but everybody else's vault. And that's why they slowly increase the vault over time. Well, obviously they haven't in a while, but that's what they do in Diablo 4 is every new season, they give you like a little bit more because they're like, hey, we messed around with stuff and we're able to give you a little bit more. So I wonder if that's just like how, for some reason, there's some like developer or reason that you're loading everybody else's items, and Last Epoch was able to like be like, yeah, we're not doing that.
I love that though.
So yeah, and then I did remember one other thing is that I don't know, you remember in Diablo 4, if you want to play the stuff the new season brings, you have to start a new character.
Yes.
That is the same in this game.
All right.
Same exact thing in this game. But here's where I argue that it's different and still worth a purchase, is that it's $35, half the price of Diablo, and the first couple seasons, all of the stuff that's being added is being added to the full game, not just the season.
Okay. So
you at least have 6 months minimum of new content for both the cycle and standard realms of the game, if you want to call them.
So they're going to have the same realm separation.
Yep, same realms as related to standard and cycle, and then when the cycle ends, that character gets moved over to standard. Just like in Diablo, like this is the thing, like this is like typical for action RPGs. Like, you know, when people freaked out over Diablo 4, that's because Diablo 4 is targeting new players.
Had a lot of Destiny players that were still, you know, talking about DCV and sunsetting. And I remember when we first put out that video for Diablo, it was like, yeah, guys, you got to start a new character. Man, everybody freaked out. At least our community did.
Yeah. So, exactly. So I'd argue this game is definitely more worth it. You know, the price is less. You have a guaranteed, 6 months of content that's going to be added to both. And like I said, you've got infinite character customization, build variety, with all these skills and all these skill trees and, over 400 unique items and, making your own legendaries and exalteds and all this grinding and stuff like that. That doesn't go anywhere. Like, the game is still there for you to play forever. Right. $35, that's it. Like, it's good without the seasons. It's good without the seasons.
Well, all right. Well, Jarrod, I think, man, we have talked a lot about Last Epoch. I'm so glad that we got to have this open discussion here. I know we were originally looking at doing just a regular review for this, but I feel like considering your experience on this, it was much better going about it this way. So thank you so much for being there. Yeah, no, it's been cool. It'd be cool to be on more videos maybe in the future. We'll see. I think so, man. I mean, there's just so many different types of games. We all have, different games that we kind of sink our teeth in. And so I am more than willing to put you up here and, maybe even have you do some singled out reviews and stuff. So I think the channel responds well. We'll roll with it. Yeah, sounds good to me. For everyone that watched this entire video, thank you so much. I would love to hear your thoughts down below on how you felt about this style of review. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always, slap that like button like your mama told you right.